Okay, how do Nei Gong and Chinese medicine relate to one another? Okay, well, there's two components to this. The first is obviously Chinese medicine as a system. While it has a study of physiology and biomechanical processes within the body, it also looks largely at the nature of Jing, Qi, Shen within the system, which rather than being an outdated esoteric concept are also very much a way of understanding the kind of energetic patterning that sits behind the functioning of your body. If you're going to work with these components of the body, these elements of the body's functioning on a medical level, then it's very, very helpful to be able to understand these things from an experiential background. This is the first and most obvious use of Nei Gong. It's obviously much easier to work with Qi if you've felt it and you've cultivated it to a certain degree yourself. Second component to this is that essentially when you're working, especially with something like acupuncture, which has become a very, very common alternative therapeutic modality these days, you're working with another person, you're trying to work with their Qi, and using through the use of a needle. And I'm not one of these people that is in the school of thought that that Qi was a metaphor for how the nervous system functioned and the fascia, and think no. I mean, it's literally talking about an energy within the body. I am from within that school of thought. If you don't have a background in energetic study, Nei Gong, Qigong, something like this, you're essentially to a large degree working blind. I mean, you may be able to read the signs and symptoms through the pathology of how the organs are manifesting on the body and things like this, but you don't have a direct connection to the person's energetic functioning. I am personally slightly distrustful of acupuncturists who don't have an energetic practice of their own or some form of cultivation, even if there's no interaction taking place on that level. You're not trying to emit Qi or something into the person's body. There's still always going to be some kind of subconscious energetic interaction taking place between two people. So I think that all therapists should have a form of self-cultivation or practice alongside what they do. And I think with Chinese medicine and acupuncture, it needs to be Qigong or Nei Gong, really. The two go hand in hand. Certainly every Chinese medicine therapist I know who I've taught Nei Gong to or have started to integrate it into their practice has found that it's completely enriched everything that they're doing. It's just brought their art to life. I mean, there are certain techniques with the needles. I use acupuncture as an example because that's the modality of Chinese medicine I'm most comfortable with. It's my specialism, if you like. There's techniques with the needle where Qi is actually contacted through the needle. So the needle actually becomes almost like a sort of magnet, for want of a better term, for drawing pathogens out of the channel and making adjustments to the quality of the Qi within the channel itself. And this can only happen if the therapist's own Qi has been built to such a level that it's able to govern the Qi within the needle and then govern the Qi within the patient's body. When you're learning these kind of things, there are specific exercises and specific skills that are trying to be developed by the therapist that they can utilize in their practice. Often the patients I get that come to me in fact, we're in my clinic room. This is where I'm filming this. This is in my clinic room. We're doing this in a corner of it. But when I get patients coming into this room for treatment, I would say about 50% of my treatment is mechanical, looking at the tissues and the physical components of the body. And the other 50% is very much to do with transmission and projection of energy and adjustment of the body in this form, sometimes through my hands, sometimes through the needle itself, especially if I want to get directly into a channel with the tip of the needle, which I obviously can't do with my finger. That would be slightly intrusive to plunge my finger into the channel, so I use the needle to get in. So these two, yeah, definitely intimately connected, Acupuncture, if someone who wants to be a Chinese herbal therapist and they want to prescribe herbal remedies, I don't necessarily think that Qigong or Nei Gong is a practice that is required. I could be wrong, but I'm not a herbal expert, but I would say that it's not really required. Perhaps even for Tui Na or something like this, not necessarily required. It will certainly enhance the practice, but I think you could get away without without it because of the physical components of the therapy. But acupuncture, Nei Gong is required, in my opinion. There should be energetic study alongside it. There's definitely a big direction, a big push that Chinese medicine is taking in the way of trying to sort of westernize it, you know, that it's trying to find out, is it the fascia we're talking about, is it the lymph system, is it the nervous system we're talking about when we put needles in, when I put this needle in, does this bit of the brain light up and things like that. As much as anything for me, it's not so much as people trying to understand acupuncture as people trying to justify it to others why they're doing it. It's almost like a level of insecurity, you know. It's like when somebody is religious but doesn't really have a very good faith in their religion. They're generally the ones that go around trying to shout their mouths off, forcing everybody else to agree with them on their viewpoints, whereas the person who's has a deep faith in their religion very rarely feels the need to shout their mouth off. They know the truth, so why should they bother trying to worry what other people think, you know? And Chinese medicine to me is the same. You know, I think all this attempt to rationalize it all the time according to Western scientific model just smacks of insecurity and in the practitioners themselves and their need to be seen as good as doctors on the same sort of setting. You know, it's not really what it's about to me. Acupuncture is a needle that's inserted into the channel system, which is a pathway that's conducting qi, energetic information, along a line. And the therapist's role is to interact with that energy, sometimes in a very intrusive fashion, sometimes in a very passive fashion, but still there has to be a certain level of cultivation of the energy inside your own body in order to be able to do that. So Nei Gong and Chinese medicine intimately related to one another. On the other side of things, as I previously said in one of the other videos, I don't believe somebody should ever try to take someone deeply into a Nei Gong process or alchemical process unless they have high-level knowledge of Chinese medicine, because that's dangerous. You need to be skilled and experienced and have clinical experience in Chinese medicine practice, just in case something goes wrong in one of your patients. I get many people sent to me by teachers who've made errors. Well, actually, I don't get sent by the teachers. And normally the teachers throw the student out of their class when something goes wrong for fear of being sued or something. So what I actually get is the students from other schools coming for treatment for errors that have gone wrong, and quite often if that teacher had just had knowledge of Chinese medicine, they'd be able to correct it themselves. Normally it's just a reverse sort of flow within one of the channels, or a depletion or an excess of yin and yang that's taken place, which if you don't do Chinese medicine, that might sound quite complex when you're watching the video, but for Chinese medicine practitioners it's actually quite a simple thing to rectify. Just takes a bit of time. So Chinese medicine and Nei Gong should go hand in hand for that reason as well, for safety for the students within a Nei Gong teacher's class. Are there differences between male and female Nei Gong practice? Yes. Yeah, there are. Yes, there are, and there's not. A complex answer. There are certain shared qualities between both genders, of course. We all have a dantian, we all have channels that we're working with, we all have the same prime organs of the lung, the heart, the liver, and what have you. This is all the same. We all have qi, jing, shen. But then there are a few differences, yes. Obviously, women have different physical components. I mean, there's the uterus that has a large part to play in women's practice, because it has an impact upon the nature of the lower dantian itself. Also, there's a different circulation for jing within the body. Within men, the jing goes from the kidneys, the essence, goes from the kidneys into the perineum and then starts to convert into sexual fluids and upwards into the lower dantian to turn into qi. A very basic mechanism, which is also the same within women's bodies. Women then also have an extra cycle, which moves from the uterus up the front of the body into the region of the chest, where they start to store jing in the chest. Okay, it's here that the jing starts to convert into, if they have a new child, breast milk, but it also starts to sink down at certain periods of the months to start to form the basis for menstrual blood. Because of the nature of the different circulations of jing within the body, it means the qi will function in a slightly different way as well. So therefore, women have certain extra practices that are put on top of the normal Nei Gong that both genders will do, just to help regulate the movement of jing and essentially menstrual blood inside the body. So for women, there are additional parts to the process, but the core of the process is the same. So I don't believe in, this is a man's system, this is a Qigong system, a women's system. I don't think that's a healthy mindset to start creating that level of divisiveness. Instead, I present a system that's gender neutral for the most part, but then there's a few extra additional practices for women that largely my wife teaches on my courses, which just help to regulate some of the components in a woman's body that men don't have. One of the other main differences, I suppose, if we're ignoring psychology at the moment, just on the sort of energetic sort of Qigong level, there's also a reverse direction of the cycles that needs to take place, because men generally, the Qi essentially to stimulate yang and then in the back of the body and then sunk down the front. That's the same for women as well, but then at certain periods of time the channel needs to reverse so that Jing is drawn from the uterus area up into the chest. This is especially important for pre-menopausal age women as well, to do this practice. And lots of women will stumble across this of their own accord. They'll find that they feel the microcosmic organ is starting to reverse. This is all quite normal for women. This is just how their bodies function a little differently from males. Part of the problem with this is that obviously the writing is very male-based, especially the classical teachings, because as with almost every tradition across the world, women had a hard time, and for some strange reason the ancient Chinese, like the rest of the planet, decided to persecute women and women's practices, and they were kind of relegated to something that really wasn't very important, which is a terrible shame. Especially, you know, in modern times, like in my school, 50% of my students are women, easily. You know, it's an even spread. My school represents the kind of wider society of the division of men and women. So I think that there needs to be more clarification on what the differences are between male and female Nei Gong or Qigong practice, and then they need to be integrated into the wider system of practice. It's a shame as well, like often how women's stuff is presented. I mean, I'm not a woman, but I would imagine that seeing it would almost offend me as a woman. It's quite patronising, some of it. I mean, in martial arts, for example, you often see sort of the way martial arts are presented for men. It's like, we're going to do this martial art to cultivate our spirit and whatever they're trying to advertise. And then you see women's martial arts, and often they've got like bright pink boxing gloves on, and it's all about losing weight and getting a slim waist so you're more attractive. And it's very, very sad that kind of thing goes on. And then when I look at lots of sort of women's spirituality, it's either based purely around sexuality, as if it's kind of suggesting the only thing about women is their sexuality, which, all right, that's a part of who human beings are, but it's not all you are. If all you are is your sexuality, then I would say maybe you need to look a bit deeper and find out more about yourself. And often it's very presented in a very sort of aesthetically pretty way, which again, if I was a woman, I'd find that quite offensive. You only have to go on social media and look at the way people are presenting sort of women's spiritual practices, and it's all like flowers and laid out nicely. It's all about being pretty, and that's a shame. You know, why does it have to be the case? Women engaging in the spiritual arts ultimately have the same possibility of building their spirit as men do. Both men and women have spirit. In a spiritual art, we are ultimately trying to build the spirit, and the spirit is built through stillness. That is all. It's not built through having a thin waist. It's not built through being aesthetically pleasing particularly. It's about developing stillness, so the stillness starts to fuel the growth of spirit. I mean, that's really all it comes down to. Everything in Qigong and Nei Gong is a foundation for that. So the movement of Jing Qi within the body prepares the body so that it's much easier for the mind to then enter into a still state so the spirit can be nourished. I mean, if you wanted to put a very succinct definition of spiritual work, that's what it is. So is there a difference between men and women's spiritual work? Only in the foundations. You know, the beginning, everyone needs to get their dantian cultivated. Then after that, there's work to regulate the Jing and the menstrual blood a little differently for women, but not much differently. Qi is then built up, and then ultimately the stillness that both genders need to develop that then cultivates the spirit is exactly the same. No need for placing pretty flowers everywhere or wearing luminous pink boxing gloves or whatever it is that the wider societal image thinks that women like when they get involved in these kind of practices. Okay, as a personal question again here, why do you teach? That's a very wide question, isn't it? Why do I teach? I wish I could give you if you're asking about why I do, I wish I could give you a very deep answer, but essentially I did what many other people do in life, and I just followed in my parents' footsteps, I'm afraid. There's no deeper meaning to that. Some people's parents are lawyers, so they become lawyers. Some people's parents are doctors, they become doctors. My parents were martial arts teachers. My dad especially, it's been an obsession with him as long as I've known him, for his entire life, and he taught martial arts. I grew up in martial arts schools, I grew up in martial arts organisations, and I guess no matter how much I would have wanted to rebel, I went the same direction and found myself running a martial arts organisation. That was the motivation. What I could tell you, I suppose, is the motivation for the design of my school. I mean, many people will fashion their schools out of their own hang-ups. Okay, that might sound strange, but it's definitely the case. Whatever somebody's hang-up is will often fuel the way they do things, which is why there's been so many cases of people trying to teach something they're not very good at as well, because often they're trying to focus on something they don't have. So they'll make their school very much about, you know, my school is all about developing strength, and then you find out often they were very sort of bullied person who feels very, very insecure inside or something like that. And it's very much the case of, if we're realistic, that people are normally trying to, by teaching, if they're doing it on a wide scale, trying to tackle something inside themselves. I have no delusions on that. You know, my approach to teaching is very much reflective of two main frustrations that I had when I was trying to learn myself. The first one of these was that I couldn't access material. You know, I couldn't access material that wasn't woolly and fluffy initially in the early years. You know what it's like. You start going into classes and meeting things. The instructions are very vague, within Qigong especially, and Tai Chi, and not very succinct, and everybody wants to just sort of float along and do their thing. And I remember reading the sort of stories of the old masters and the things they were capable of doing, whether legendary or not, it didn't matter. They were inspiring, and I was hearing about all these things they could do, and the cultivation of the mind, and the potential of enlightenment. And then I'd walk into the Qigong class, and there's just this disconnect between what I was being taught and what was possible, you know. So when I did finally start to access some material that had some depth to it, by traveling, I mean, essentially I chucked in my life and just left and went to the other side of the planet to see how they do things over there, and I explored like crazy until I got introductions and met various masters and what have you. But when I decided to run my own school, or decided to try and figure out how I was going to do this, one thing that was important to me was I didn't want to give people the same woolly, fluffy, new age, nonsensical approach to these arts that I'd encountered, because ultimately, while it might be nice, you know, and things, it suits some people who just want to chill out and have fun, but it wasn't any good for people like myself that really wanted to understand these arts. So I present in a very open fashion. That was very important to me from the beginning. The other side of my teaching, as much as anything, is that this is where I say the hang-ups come up, is when I was younger, I had a lot of insecurities, like many people do, and I guess I found the world quite a frightening place, especially when I was very, very young. I was overly sensitive, really, and I don't mean like in an energetic way, I just mean emotionally overly sensitive, so I found the world quite hard, you know, it was quite a scary place. As I grew up through these arts, then I don't feel the same way anymore. I find the world quite a pleasant place. I enjoy it. I enjoy the people in my life. I enjoy the people I teach. I enjoy the people I'm surrounded by. Life is marvelous. But I don't want other people to feel that same thing. So a lot of my teaching is about building up people's strength. And through martial arts, I do that through trying to help them to deal with the sort of stresses, a stressor, you know, dealing with another person. And in Nei Gong and Qigong, a lot of the time the basis is about building more qi, building more jing, so it's about to nourish the spirit, to build the person's spirit, so they have a lot of inner fortitude, a lot of inner strength, so they have the ability to do what they want to do with their life without being feeling like they're frightened or put upon, you know. So those are, I guess, two main reasons that I teach. Or the two main reasons, two main things that fashioned the way that I teach more than anything else. I mean, on a simple level, aside from that as well, it's massively rewarding to see the people that come into a class and they have everything from physical hang-ups or injuries or problems, through to emotional difficulties, and then through this classical system of converting the quality of the mind, they learn to deal with these or change their situation, and they start to become stronger, more confident, and I mean that the rewarding nature of that is enough for me. And aside from that, I'm completely useless at everything else in life. If I didn't teach this, I don't know what I'd do. I barely function on a daily basis outside of these arts, so it's a good job I have this job. Siddhi, what are they and how important are they? Okay, so if you're not familiar with what Siddhi are, I mean that's a Sanskrit term for sort of psychic and supernormal abilities that can come out of internal training. In Taoism, that's called Chengjiu, but essentially the same thing. So we're talking like everything from enhanced sensitivity to other people's emotions and feelings, through to the ability to issue qi in skillful ways, or transmission, through to everything from seeing the future or understanding the nature of a person's Ming, destiny and karma, things like this. Very sort of high-level abilities that can develop out of these. What are they and how important are they? Well, okay, then they're another controversial part of the practice. Firstly, a lot of people don't believe in them, which I can understand. If you've not experienced them, then you wouldn't believe them, but whether you trust me or not, I don't mind. It's not important, but I can definitely tell you that they are true. They are real. Several of the people that I've trained with have very advanced development and have these abilities, Siddhi. They are something that arises naturally out of the practice, and they arise as a cultivation either of the qi and the shen, not generally the jing, but normally the qi and the shen. Some of them will come naturally as a byproduct of the training when people hit a certain level, and some of them actually have specific practices that lead to the development of Siddhi. There's like a cause and effect relationship with them. They often start to manifest in high-level practitioners of meditation and Nei Gong, and they're often used in a medicinal format. I mean, that's often how people start to use the skills. They can be used for healing or something like this. They're controversial in that there's also a side to it that you need to understand what the Siddhi were. When the Siddhi arose in somebody, these abilities start to arise, they were simply a marker that a person had reached a certain level. So they recognize Siddhi for certain levels of attainment, certain qualities of qi and shen within the body, and they're listed within sort of the Nei Gong traditions, yeah? So if somebody started to develop a particular ability, it would show that this aspect of their qi or shen had been cultivated to a certain level. So they were markers of how something was developed. The problem was that anything that arises like this, if it makes a person feel special, or has the potential to compared to other people, can develop a very, very strong attachment. And if it starts to develop an attachment, then it can actually be counterproductive to a person's spiritual development. So for this reason, most of the teachings were the Siddhi should arise, but then they shouldn't be used, or they shouldn't be focused upon. You know, they're just a natural byproduct of what you're doing, and then you should just keep progressing in your arts. They should never be aimed for or strove for in any particular way, because that becomes unhealthy. And you do meet people in the Nei Gong world who've seen certain videos of Nei Gong masters doing amazing things, so it just becomes an obsession with them. That's all they're going to hunt. They want to learn that skill. Inevitably, they never get anywhere. They certainly never learn the skill. There's almost a karmic nature to this constant striving that stops them getting anywhere. That should be that people should be aware of. You know, that's how they use, and sometimes some of the Siddhi, especially to do with the emission of energies, can actually be quite draining for the body, so it can be very, very bad for your health, and ultimately start to damage the body as well. You are giving a part of yourself when you're starting to emit qi. Often qi therapists and qi healers don't realize this. They think that they're just absorbing this energy through and out, but it's really not the case. It does actually take from you. You can't use those kind of skills without there being some kind of payoff. How important are they? Well, they were important because they were markers in somebody's progress, and they were a way of understanding once you get to high-level practice where you are in what you're doing. I should point out as well that there's often an attitude which to me is kind of a cop-out, actually, amongst many teachers, where they say, we don't aim for Siddhi, we don't aim for these abilities because they're bad for our karma, therefore I haven't got any. I mean, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. You know, it's like there's a saying that I remember being told very young, that you can't rise above what you can't do. I mean, it's been a rule for everything, all of my practice. So it's like, I can't levitate personally, but I haven't risen above the ability to levitate. I just can't levitate. I mean, that's stating the obvious, but it seems to be something that's missed. So you've got all of these yoga and Qigong and meditation people with absolutely no skill or ability whatsoever, saying that they'll never have any of that skill, ability, or whatever. They'll never get any of those because they're too high-minded and they're not aiming for those, and they've risen above those. And that almost becomes counterproductive. That's almost to me like a top athlete saying they'll never be at the top of their field because they've risen above striving to be at the top of their field. It's a strange mindset, you know. Ultimately, the mindset of the practice shouldn't be to obsessively strive for something, but instead to be continually just working through your art, increasing the efficiency of what you do. And if these siddhi arise, and that's fine, that's a natural part of your development, but then they shouldn't be attached to afterwards. Generally, the teachers that have them will demonstrate them, normally with close students, so that their students can see as evidence, okay, this is what my teacher has achieved, this is where they are, almost to develop a kind of faith, I suppose, and also because you do need to know where people are that are teaching you. And then after that, then you just carry on practicing. This is how they use, certainly in the teachers that approach them in the healthiest mindset, you know. So they're important and they're not important. They're not important as in we don't massively strive and drive for them, but they are important, and actually they are a sign of, they're a marker of development, of a level of skill. And if you look at old accounts of lots of meditation masters in Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, you'll see that they would often demonstrate siddhi to show that to their students, to show their level of mastery and show them that this is what byproduct will arise out of my practice, you know. So the balance towards them is don't obsess over them, but if you're good, some of them should start to manifest as well. Don't cop out. Don't be a cop out by saying, I don't have any abilities, but that's because I'm too high-minded and I'm not going to strive for them. You can't rise above what you can't do. Okay, that applies to many, many things in life.